Welcome back. Today I wanted to give you some warnings for Khechari Mudra. It's a very advanced mudra. It's easy to misunderstand some of the directions that come from the different spiritual texts. And so I want to give you some warnings around those instructions. So let's get into it. The first one that I want to warn about is cutting. So if you read the texts on Khechari Mudra, it will tell you you can take a little wire, a sharp wire or a sharp something and make tiny little cuts underneath the tongue. And I want to warn against that because if you're playing with a knife and your mouth and your tongue, it's very easy to mess up. It's really not recommended. In fact, Lahiri Mahasaya, in my lineage, Lahiri Mahasaya was very much against cutting of any kind. So I just want to warn you. So here's why, okay? So let's get into the why. First of all, there are veins. So you could have bleeding, and oral bleeding is different from topical bleeding. So if you cut your skin, you can clasp that down and stop it. But bleeding that takes place inside the mouth is a lot hard. It's more difficult to stuff something in there and stop the bleeding. So first of all is bleeding. But more importantly for you, there are nerves in the tongue and there are nerves under the tongue. And if you damage some of those nerves or one of those nerves, you can stop the flow of energy. You're creating an energetic connection between the pituitary gland and the tongue, right? You want all of those nerves to create a resonance between the 2 points. And if you're cutting those nerves, you can mess up your tongue. Maybe you don't care, like, I don't care what happens to my tongue, but you should care about that resonance that you're trying to create. So, blood vessels, nerves, those are a problem. There's a lot of benefit that comes from just stretching because you're pulling on this point, the carotid sinus that are in the neck. There's one on either side of the neck. So you're pulling on those when you practice the stretching. So if you just jump past all the stretching, you're going to miss out on that beautiful stretching of the tongue, which also affects the linguistic mind. You're affecting the left brain by stretching out the tongue. Stretching is very good. Cutting nerves and cutting blood vessels in the mouth is very bad. So I want to warn you against cutting. Now, if you feel that there's no way you're ever going to get it, and you're very frustrated, and you're determined that you are going to cut, now, I'm not recommending this at all, but if you're in that place, please go to a doctor. If you're going to do anything like that, go to a doctor and let the doctor do it for you, okay? Because you just don't want to be messing around cutting stuff in your mouth. It's not a good idea. Let a professional do that for you. Now, I had a critic on this channel. He told me I'm not a master of Khechari because I can't touch my tongue to my spiritual eye. I don't need to be a master. I just need it to work for me. That's all I care about. But here's something very important. If you were to stretch your tongue and you were just determined that I'm going to touch my forehead with my spiritual eye, and so you force your tongue to become that long, first of all, you've messed up Khechari. And second of all, you've disfigured your tongue. It won't be normal in your mouth anymore. And you can see ascetics who have done this. And they've done it as a kind of yogic pride. Look how long my tongue is. It hangs out of my mouth. But it's really based on a misunderstanding. And I feel compassion for those ascetics who have done that. It's really completely unnecessary. And it's a mistranslation of the text. What that text is actually talking about is when you put the tongue into the nasopharynx and you touch the sphenoid sinus, which is above the nasal septum. So the nasal septum is like right here, right? So you're in the nasopharynx and you rise above that and you'll find there's a very small indent at the top of the nasopharynx, and that's what you want the tongue to touch. And when you do that, it has the spiritual eye has the opportunity to light up. It's not guaranteed, but it has the opportunity to light up like a Christmas tree. And when that happens, you see it here in the forehead. So it's as if the tongue is touching the forehead, right? But you don't actually pull the tongue out and touch the forehead. It's an esoteric experience. So I just want to warn you, please don't pull your tongue so hard that you disfigure it. So I'm going to show you the length of my tongue, and this is as long as you need it. That's it. You don't need it any longer than that. Okay, so I've stretched the connective tissue underneath my tongue enough that I can touch all the way down into either nostril, inside, on either side of the nasal septum. I can touch all the way up to the sphenoid sinus. You don't need it any longer. In fact, that tissue under my tongue there's like that much that's left. That's it. And I don't need any more. My tongue already fills up my nasopharynx. So if you imagine you get your tongue to touch your spiritual eye, it's going to be so long. You're not going to fit it into the nasopharynx. And that's a problem for the real practice of Khechari. So I just want to put that out there. Please don't let a misunderstanding of a text lead you astray. Now also in those texts there are some instructions that you should break through the skull, okay? There's a lot of breaking through in those texts. And what this is meant to describe is the breakthrough that happens when the energetic connection between the tongue and the pituitary gland, when that takes place, that is an explosion, and it feels like things are breaking away. It's possible that the experience of light can so overwhelm you that your sense of self momentarily becomes very loose and breaks away from you. So that is the true breaking, the breakthrough into the deep brain. So for goodness sake, don't try and break your skull. And this is so important that it was put into the 108 letters that the son of Lahiri Mahasaya put together in the garland of letters. It's 108 letters of Lahiri Mahasaya to and from his students. And in those letters, Lahiri warns against this. That's how important it is. Be very, very gentle with the sphenoid sinus. For goodness sake, don't try and do any breaking. It's a very, very gentle process to touch into the sphenoid sinus. It's not brute strength. That's a different kind of program, right? Nothing in yoga should be brute strength. It should all be an easy, natural progression. That's why Lahiri Mahasaya called his yoga Sahaja yoga, which means natural or purity or original natural state. So those are all of the warnings. Two other things that I wanted to talk about. You really want to clean out the tongue and the mouth and also the nasal pharynx. So how do you do that? You want to clean all of that out as you're getting in the tongue into the nasal pharynx. Otherwise, the acidic taste can be very, very strong. So there's these levels of taste that are described from acid to milk. And what that's describing is the process of cleaning out your nasal pharynx and then coming in contact with the pituitary gland, with the energetic connection with the pituitary gland, to clean out some of that acid, which is the mucus inside of the nasopharynx and the mucus that may accumulate on your tongue. You want to use one of those tongue scratchers, if you've ever seen one of them, and scratch the tongue. You can also take, if you are away from home and you can't order one of those, you can also use your fingernails and just scratch the top of the tongue very gently, very naturally, scratch the top of the tongue and take any plaque that has built up on the tongue. Gargle with salt, that will clean out the nasopharynx, and that will get you ready to place the tongue inside the nasopharynx. And I mentioned this before, the trick to that is to stretch the tongue enough that you can actually use your fingers and push the tongue up into the nasopharynx very gently, very easily, so you can begin to get the tongue up past the soft palate. And over time, the soft palate will stretch slightly and reprogram so it's ready to accept the tongue, and then you can begin to put the tongue up yourself. The last thing, and this is really exciting, someone sent me a talk by a gentleman who had come to America, had forgotten some of his meditative stuff, decided he's going to get back into it. He became in love with a certain yogic text, and he deciphered it and began to practice it. And what he began to practice is a form of alternate nostril breathing. And the thing that he noticed is that his saliva increased dramatically in meditation. When this happened, instead of just noticing it and passing on like I did, he actually studied it. He used a control group and a group of meditators, and all of the meditators, as soon as they got into meditation, they began to increase the amount of saliva that was being secreted down the throat. And all of that saliva had increased nutritional content, increased protein content, and increased hormonal content. Amazing. So what is that? Well, it's Amrita. This is, and he doesn't mention this, I think he might be nervous about making such a claim, but this is the physical manifestation of Amrita. It's not the energetic, it's not the deep bliss that is promised, but this is the physical side of Amrita. It is the saliva that increases as soon as you get into heart rate variability. That's my theory. As soon as you get into heart rate variability, the saliva changes. It increases all of the hormonal centers like the pituitary gland and the thyroid gland begin to work in harmony once more. And so the protein, nutrition, and hormonal content is increased in the saliva and begins to cascade down into the body. So I'm going to link his video below. Please go and watch it. He has a book available as well. I'll also link that below. Very interesting, very amazing. We're in a very amazing time where we are following the Vedic process of discovery, where you study, practice, verify, and then study again. It's a beautiful process. So we're living in a very exciting time, aren't we? Where we're beginning to align a lot of these yogic concepts with medical understanding. And there's always more to learn, but at this point, I feel as if I can describe the entire yogic process medically. And that's very powerful. So I hope this was valuable to you guys. If it was, be sure to hit subscribe, click that bell down there, and I'll see you next time.